The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched impossibly high, its crystalline walls refracting light from 3 different suns. Delegate species from across known space filled the chamber, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of civilization's greatest achievements. But today, the usual diplomatic murmurs had been replaced by barely contained laughter. A maintenance worker. First speaker Kethel's translucent tentacles rippled with amusement. Earth sends us a maintenance worker for the greatest universal challenge. Sarah Chen stood at the center of the chamber, her standard-issue work uniform stark against the ornate surroundings. Her tool belt, ancient by galactic standards, hung comfortably around her waist. She looked small among the towering alien delegates, but her stance remained steady, hands loosely at her sides. Correct, the human ambassador confirmed from his position in the viewing gallery. Sarah Chen, head of maintenance operations for the North American power grid. The laughter grew louder. A Zentari scientist, their crystalline form gleaming with stored energy, stepped forward. This is an insult. We face an energy crisis that threatens the stability of entire star systems. The greatest universal challenge demands our finest minds, our most advanced theorists. The Zentari delegation alone brings 12 quantum architects and 7 dimension folders. Sarah's eyes tracked the various alien delegates, taking in their advanced biotechnology, their seamlessly integrated AI systems, their reality-bending capabilities. Her expression remained neutral, but those watching closely might have caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. If I may, she spoke for the first time, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I'd like to see the problem firsthand. First speaker Kethel's tentacles ceased their movement. You understand this is not some primitive fission reactor or solar array. We face cascading failures in the quantum fabric of space-time itself. Our power generation systems. Show me, Sarah interrupted, a breach of protocol that sent gasps through the assembly. The massive central hologram activated, displaying a complex network of energy distribution systems spanning multiple galaxies. Points of crimson indicated failing nodes, spreading like a virus through the network. The most advanced civilization in known space had spent decades building this system, and now it was collapsing. Sarah stepped closer to the hologram, her eyes narrowing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something that caused several alien delegates to step back in alarm. A simple paper notebook and pencil. Is this real-time data? She asked, sketching rapidly. It is, the Zentari scientist answered, their tone dripping with condescension. Though I doubt primitive graphite marking tools will. There's your problem, Sarah said, still sketching. You've built a perfect system. The chamber fell silent. Perfection, she continued, circling a section of her drawing, is your enemy. No redundancy, no flexibility, no room for failure. She looked up at the gathered delegates. Systems need to breathe. Breathe. First speaker Kethel's translator struggled with the concept. Energy networks do not require respiratory functions. Sarah smiled fully now. Figure of speech. But watch this. She pulled a tablet from her tool belt, practically an antique by galactic standards, and interfaced it with the hologram system. The delegates murmured in surprise as her device connected successfully to their advanced technology. Your system is like a crystal, she explained, manipulating the display. Beautiful, flawless, and extremely brittle. One crack and, she highlighted a failing node. The whole thing starts to shatter. But if you introduce controlled chaos, planned imperfection. Her fingers flew across the tablet. The holographic network began to shift, its rigid geometric patterns dissolving into something more organic, more fluid. Red warning points began to fade to yellow, then green. Impossible, the Zentari scientist whispered. No, Sarah corrected, still working. Just human. We learned this back home, managing power grids during natural disasters. Perfect systems fail perfectly. Imperfect systems adapt. The chamber watched in stunned silence as she continued to modify the network. She worked with the casual confidence of someone who had spent decades keeping complex systems running with whatever tools were available. Where alien scientists saw theoretical perfection, she saw practical solutions. "There," she said finally, stepping back from the hologram. "That section should stabilize within the next few hours. The rest will take more time, but the principle is the same." She glanced at her watch, an actual mechanical timepiece that caused several alien delegates to lean forward in fascination. "Though if you don't mind, I could use a coffee before we continue. The jet lag from Earth is killer." First Speaker Kethel's tentacles had gone completely still. You solved the cascading failure in Section 7. In minutes. Temporarily, Sarah cautioned, returning her tablet to her belt. "It's a patch job, but it'll hold while we implement a permanent solution." She paused, then added with a slight grin. "That's something else we learned in maintenance. Sometimes a good patch is better than a perfect fix that comes too late." The Zentari scientist had moved closer to the hologram, their crystalline form analyzing the changes. "The complexity, the organic integration. It shouldn't work. Our most advanced AIs couldn't conceive of this approach." "That's because you keep trying to perfect the system," Sarah explained. "We humans learned the hard way. You can't control everything. Better to build systems that bend instead of break." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes and equivalent sensory organs of the assembled delegates. "Your power grid is incredible, but it needs to learn how to fail gracefully." First Speaker Cathal raised himself to his full height, tentacles swaying thoughtfully. Perhaps we were too hasty in our judgment. You will show us more of these patch jobs?" Sarah nodded, already pulling her notebook back out. "Happy to. But seriously, about that coffee?" As the chamber erupted in excited discussion, the human ambassador smiled quietly in the gallery. He'd argued hard for sending Sarah instead of a team of theoretical physicists. He'd seen firsthand how human maintenance workers had kept Earth's infrastructure running through everything from solar flares to AI rebellions. Sometimes the most advanced solution wasn't the right one. Sarah was already sketching again, surrounded by increasingly interested alien delegates. Her simple tools and practical experience stood in stark contrast to their advanced technology. But as humanity had learned long ago, the most powerful innovation often came from the most unexpected places. The greatest universal challenge had just begun, and humanity's maintenance worker was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about the power of imperfection. The Galactic Council's engineering bay dwarfed anything on Earth, its ceiling lost in a maze of floating diagnostic platforms and shimmering energy conduits. Sarah Chen sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by holographic displays, and to the continuing bewilderment of her alien observers, paper diagrams. "Fascinating," muttered Dr. Excelfor, the Procyon's leading quantum architect. His crystalline eyes refracted light as he studied Sarah's hand-drawn schematics. "You persist in using these physical marking implements when our neural interfaces could map the entire system instantly." Sarah looked up from where she was sketching modifications to a power distribution node. "Sometimes you need to slow down to speed up," she said, adding another node to her growing collection. "Besides, can your neural interfaces do this?" She folded one of her diagrams into an intricate shape, creating a three-dimensional model of the energy flow pattern. "Origami," she explained to the puzzled aliens. "Ancient Earth art form. Sometimes the best way to understand a system is to physically reshape it." The temporary fix she'd implemented in her first day had held, but the underlying problems in the galactic power grid were far more complex than anyone had realized. The aliens' pursuit of perfection hadn't just made their system brittle, it had blinded them to its fundamental flaws. "Impossible," declared First Speaker Cathal, who had taken to observing Sarah's work personally. "The quantum harmonics cannot be maintained without perfect symmetry. It is a basic law of energy distribution." Sarah stood up, brushing off her work pants. "Who told you that?" The question caused a ripple of unease among the assembled aliens. The Zentari scientist from earlier, Sarah had learned his name was Vazin, stepped forward. It is not a matter of being told. It is fundamental physics. The equations. Show me, Sarah interrupted, a habit that still shocked the protocol-minded aliens. She gestured to her paper diagrams. Show me where in your equations it says the harmonics have to be symmetrical. The aliens exchanged glances. Vezin waved his crystalline appendage, and complex mathematical formulas appeared in the air around them. Sarah walked through them, occasionally reaching out to rotate a floating equation for a better look. Here, she said finally, pointing to a particular symbol. This assumption. Who made it? The great theorist Ixtal. Over 3,000 years ago, Keffel answered. His work forms the basis of all modern energy distribution. Sarah pulled out her tablet, interfacing it with the holographic display. And in those 3,000 years, did anyone ever test it? The silence was answer enough. On Earth, Sarah continued, her fingers flying across her tablet's screen. We had a saying in maintenance. Theory tells you how it should work. Experience tells you how it does work. Watch this. The massive engineering bay hummed as Sarah initiated a test sequence. She had spent the last week setting up this demonstration, using parts scrounged from what the aliens considered obsolete technology. The assembled delegates watched as energy began flowing through her jury-rigged system. By all known laws, Vezin protested, this configuration should collapse instantly. Known laws, Sarah emphasized, based on an assumption made 3,000 years ago. She adjusted a control, and the energy flow stabilized into a pattern that defied the aliens' understanding of physics. Sometimes the universe doesn't read the manual. The implications were staggering. If this basic assumption about quantum harmonics was wrong, then countless other theories built upon it. This changes everything, Dr. Excelfor whispered, his crystalline form vibrating with excitement. The entire foundation of our energy science needs revision. Sarah finished. But that's good news. It means we have options we didn't know existed. Not everyone shared the excitement. Several of the more conservative delegates had drawn back, their body language, even across species, showing clear distress. 3,000 years of theoretical work, challenged by a human with hand tools and paper diagrams. The council must evaluate these findings, one of them declared. This is too radical a departure from established science. Sarah was already back at her diagrams, sketching new ideas. Take all the time you need, she said without looking up. But the grid won't wait. Those cascading failures are still spreading, just slower now. We need solutions, not committees. First Speaker Keffel moved closer to examine her work. These patterns, they remind me of something. His tentacles waved thoughtfully. The fluid dynamics of gas giants, perhaps, or the growth patterns of crystal forests on Centauri Prime. Nature, Sarah nodded. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Perfect symmetry exists in theory, but reality. She held up one of her origami models. Reality flows. It adapts. It finds its own path. She stood again, addressing the gathered delegates. Your power grid is trying to tell you something. It's fighting against the perfection you're forcing on it. Let it breathe. Let it flow naturally, and... A sudden alarm cut through the engineering bay. New red points were appearing in the main grid display. Another cascade was beginning, this one in a previously stable sector. Impossible, Vezin exclaimed. The theoretical models predicted at least another month before. Theory, Sarah interrupted, already moving toward the control interface. Reality. Pick one. She glanced at the increasingly worried aliens. Who's ready to try something really unorthodox? The engineering bay erupted into activity as Sarah began implementing her next solution. As she worked, she couldn't help but smile. Back on Earth, she'd kept power flowing through hurricanes, solar storms, and alien invasions. Compared to that, fixing the galaxy's power grid was just another day at the office. Even if some of her alien colleagues might never recover from seeing her fix quantum technology with duct tape. Sarah's unorthodox solution had saved an entire sector of the galactic power grid, but the political fallout was just beginning. The Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with tension as species took sides in what was becoming known as the human heresy. This is methodological chaos. The Arquillian Minister of Sciences was practically vibrating with indignation, his crystalline structure flashing morning colors. First, the quantum harmonic assumption. Now this. She's dismantling 3 millennia of established theory with maintenance protocols. Sarah stood calmly at her workstation, continuing her modifications while the debate raged around her. She'd seen this before. People more worried about protecting old ideas than solving new problems. The only difference was that now those people had tentacles and extra-dimensional physics degrees. The results speak for themselves, Dr. Xelthor countered. He had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters. His initial skepticism transformed into fierce scientific curiosity. Grid stability is up 47% in implemented sectors. Power efficiency has increased by. At what cost? Interrupted Vozin. The Zentari scientist, who had once mocked Sarah's methods, now seemed almost afraid. She's introducing controlled chaos into the most advanced power distribution system ever created, using principles derived from watching Earth weather patterns. Nature, Sarah spoke up, not looking away from her work, has been doing this longer than any of us. Maybe it knows something we don't. The chamber fell silent as she approached the central hologram, her tablet interfacing seamlessly with the alien technology. The display showed the galaxy's power grid, now transformed in the sectors where she'd implemented her changes. The rigid geometric patterns were gone, replaced by flowing, organic distributions that seemed to pulse with life. Look at this, she said, highlighting a particular section. Traditional theory says this configuration is impossible. The power should tear itself apart, but it doesn't. Know why? She switched to a different view, because it's not fighting itself anymore. It's finding its natural balance, like a river finding its course. Rivers erode their banks, the Arquillian minister snapped. They flood. They destroy. Sometimes, Sarah agreed. But they also create. They adapt. They survive. She brought up another display, this one showing the failed systems that had prompted the greatest universal challenge in the first place. Your perfect system was like a dam about to break. I'm just letting the pressure release naturally. First speaker Keffel, who had been unusually quiet, moved his tentacles in a pattern that the universal translator interpreted as deep thought. The council has reviewed the preliminary data. The results are compelling. Compelling. Vazin's crystalline form pulsed with alarm. First speaker, surely you cannot be considering. I am considering survival, Keffel interrupted. Our power grid is failing. Traditional solutions have failed. And now, a human maintenance worker has shown us why. His tentacles rippled. Perhaps it is time we acknowledge that perfection may be the enemy of function. The chamber erupted in argument again, but Sarah had already turned back to her work. She had learned long ago that the best way to win an argument was to solve the problem while others debated it. Her tablet displayed new data from the latest implementation, and something caught her eye. Hey, she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. You might want to see this. The display changed, showing an unexpected pattern in the energy flow. Where her organic distribution method had been implemented, the power wasn't just stabilizing. It was becoming more efficient than anyone had thought possible. The chaotic elements were self-organizing into patterns that defied conventional physics. That's... Dr. Xelthor leaned closer, his crystalline eyes refracting in amazement. That's beautiful. It's impossible, the Arquillian minister whispered, but there was less certainty in his voice now. It's natural, Sarah corrected. We're not just fixing the grid anymore. We're letting it evolve. She turned to face the assembled delegates. Your system was perfect, but static. This, she gestured to the flowing patterns. This is alive. The implication slowly dawned on the gathered species. They had built their power grid to be a perfect machine, but Sarah had transformed it into something closer to a living system. It didn't just distribute energy anymore. It adapted, learned, grew. There will be resistance, Kethel warned. Many worlds have built their entire technological philosophy around the old theories. Sarah shrugged, already making notes in her paper notebook. Back home, we had a saying. Nature doesn't care what you believe in. It just is. She looked up at the alien delegates. Your grid was dying because you tried to force it to be something it's not. Now it's healing itself. And what happens when it heals completely? Vazin asked, his tone suggesting he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. That's the best part, Sarah smiled, holding up one of her origami diagrams. We're about to find out. The grid isn't just stabilizing. It's starting to show signs of capabilities we never imagined. But first, she glanced at the humans' viewing gallery, where the ambassador was trying not to look too smug. I'm going to need more coffee. And maybe some duct tape. The universe, it seemed, was about to get a lesson in the power of imperfection, and humanity's maintenance worker was just getting started. The attack came without warning. One moment, Sarah was explaining her latest modifications to Dr. Excelfor. The next, the entire engineering bay erupted in chaos. Warning alerts screamed across every display as critical systems began failing in sequence, not the natural cascades they'd been fighting, but something deliberate and malicious. Sabotage. Dr. Excelfor's crystalline form pulsed with alarm. Someone's attacking the core systems. Sarah was already moving, her fingers flying across her tablet. No, she said, eyes scanning the data streams. They're not attacking the system. They're attacking my changes. She looked up at the massive holographic display, where her carefully crafted organic power distributions were being systematically destroyed. They're trying to force it back to the old way. First Speaker Kethel burst into the chamber, his tentacles writhing in distress. The purist faction, he announced. They've taken control of key network nodes. They claim they're restoring order to chaos and purging the human corruption. Sarah barely heard him. She was too busy watching the power patterns she'd spent weeks implementing collapse one by one. The rigid geometric configurations of the old system were being reinstated, and the results were catastrophic. They don't understand, she muttered, grabbing her notebook and flipping through pages of diagrams. The grid has evolved beyond that now. Forcing it back will. A new alarm cut through the chamber, this one deeper and more urgent than the others. The main display showed a massive energy surge building in the system's core. By the first stars, Vazin whispered, having arrived in time to see the disaster unfolding. The containment fields are failing. If the core goes critical, how long? Sarah demanded, already pulling tools from her belt. Minutes, maybe less, Dr. Excelfor answered. The purists' attempts to restore the old configurations are creating feedback loops. The energy has nowhere to go. Sarah looked at the display, then at her diagrams, then back at the display. She took a deep breath. Yes, it does. Before anyone could stop her, she was running toward the main control interface. The purists are trying to force order on a system that's learned to be chaos, she called over her shoulder. Fine. Let's give them chaos. What are you doing? Vazin demanded as Sarah began rapidly reconfiguring systems. Something really stupid, she answered, not looking up from her work. Or really brilliant. Ask me again if we survive. Her fingers danced across the controls as she implemented changes faster than the aliens could follow. Where the purists were trying to restore rigid order, she was introducing even more chaos. But chaos with a purpose. They're trying to dam the river, she explained as she worked. I'm giving it somewhere to flood. The energy readings from the core continued to climb to impossible levels. The purists, realizing something was wrong, began trying to counter Sarah's changes, but she was moving too fast, working with an intuition born from decades of keeping systems running by any means necessary. Sarah, Dr. Excelfor warned, the core temperature is reaching critical levels. Whatever you're planning. Almost there, she interrupted, making one final adjustment. Now we just need. She reached into her toolkit and pulled out something that made the aliens gasp in horror. "Is that?" First Speaker Kethel's tentacles curled in disbelief. "Is that more duct tape?" Sarah grinned as she secured a crucial connection. "Never leave home without it." She stepped back from the console. "Okay, everyone hold on to something. This is going to get weird." The chamber's gravity shifted as Sarah's changes took effect. The energy that had been building in the core began to move, not in the rigid patterns the purists were trying to enforce, but in wild, seemingly random configurations that somehow, impossibly, worked together. "Impossible," Vudazin whispered, watching the display. "The energy patterns. They're dancing," Sarah finished. "I gave them room to dance." The core temperature began to drop as the excess energy dispersed through Sarah's new pathways. The power wasn't flowing through the grid anymore. It was flowing around it, through it, with it, in patterns that defied conventional physics but followed a deeper, more natural order. "The purists," Kethel observed, "they're losing control. Their access to the system is being absorbed." Sarah nodded, watching the display with intense concentration. The grid isn't just adapting anymore, it's defending itself. They tried to force it back into its cage, but it's learned too much. It remembers what freedom feels like. One by one, the warning alerts began to silence. The core stabilized, then began operating at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. The purists' attempts to restore the old system were being actively countered by the grid itself, which had developed its own form of intelligence, not the rigid AI the aliens had tried to implement, but something more organic, more alive. "What have you done?" Vudazin asked, his tone mixing awe with fear. Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly, leaning against the console. "I just reminded the universe that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to let it solve itself." She pulled out her notebook, already starting to sketch new ideas. "Though I have to admit, I didn't expect it to become quite this independent." The assembled aliens watched in stunned silence as their power grid, once the pinnacle of ordered perfection, continued to evolve before their eyes. It had become something entirely new, neither purely machine nor purely organic, but a hybrid that defied classification. "The purists will try again," Kethel warned. "Let them," Sarah replied, not looking up from her sketching. "The grid knows better now. You can't force nature back into a box once it's learned to break free." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though we might want to keep some extra duct tape handy, just in case." 3 months after the purist attack, Sarah Chen stood before the full Galactic Council for what they were calling a final assessment. The Grand Assembly Hall looked different now. Holographic displays showed the transformed power grid, its organic patterns flowing like celestial rivers across the galaxy. But more striking was the change in the delegates themselves. "Begin your report," First Speaker Kethel instructed, but his tentacles moved in what Sarah had learned was an expression of pride. "The grid is stable," she said, activating her trusted tablet one last time. "But stable doesn't mean static anymore. It's continuing to evolve, finding new efficiencies, creating new patterns we never imagined possible." She gestured to the flowing energy displays. "In the last week alone, it's developed 3 new distribution methods that our best theorists are still trying to understand." "And you're not concerned?" the Arquillian minister asked. His earlier hostility had been replaced by cautious fascination. "A system this autonomous could be dangerous." Sarah shook her head. "You're still thinking in terms of control. The grid isn't a machine anymore. It's more like an ecosystem. It doesn't need to be controlled, just understood." She pulled out her paper notebook, now worn and coffee-stained, but still her most valued tool. "Nature finds balance if you let it." Dr. Excelthor stepped forward, his crystalline form shimmering with excitement. "The implications extend far beyond power distribution. Already, we're seeing applications in planetary terraforming, stellar engineering, even space-time manipulation. The human approach to The human approach, Va Zin interrupted, or Sarah Chen's approach. The chamber fell silent. It was a crucial distinction. The council had been debating whether Sarah's success was replicable, whether other humans, or other species, could learn to work with systems the way she did. Sarah closed her notebook and looked around the chamber. When I first came here, you all thought I was a joke, a maintenance worker with primitive tools trying to solve the galaxy's biggest engineering crisis. She smiled. But that's exactly why it worked. On Earth, maintenance isn't about making things perfect. It's about keeping things running, adapting to problems, finding solutions with whatever you have available. She walked to the central display, where her organic power distributions danced across space. Every human maintenance worker knows this. Every engineer who's had to fix things in the real world knows it. We learn it from keeping old cars running, from patching aging infrastructure, from dealing with systems that aren't perfect but need to work anyway. A philosophy of imperfection, Keffel mused, his tentacles moving thoughtfully. A philosophy of reality, Sarah corrected. The universe isn't perfect. It's messy, chaotic, beautiful. Your power grid was dying because you tried to impose perfect order on an imperfect universe. All I did was remind it how to be natural. The implications slowly sank in across the chamber. It wasn't just about power distribution anymore. Humanity had introduced something far more fundamental to galactic civilization. A new way of thinking about technology, about progress, about the relationship between order and chaos. The Council has reached a decision, Keffel announced. We are establishing a new division, the Department of Practical Engineering. And we want you, Sarah Chen, to lead it. Sarah blinked in surprise. Me? But I'm just a maintenance worker who revolutionized our understanding of universal energy patterns. Va Zin finished. Who taught us that perfection is less valuable than adaptation? Who showed us that sometimes the most advanced solution is to let systems find their own way? Besides, Dr. Excelthor added, his crystalline eyes twinkling, someone needs to teach the galaxy how to properly use duct tape. Laughter rippled through the chamber, not mocking this time, but genuine appreciation. Sarah looked around at the assembled delegates, at the flowing patterns of energy that had become her legacy, at the bridge she had built between human practicality and alien theory. On one condition, she said finally, the department needs a coffee maker, a real one, from Earth. Granted, Kethel's tentacles waved in amusement, though I must ask, does coffee truly enhance human cognitive functions as significantly as our observations suggest? Sarah grinned, patting her toolkit. That first speaker is one of humanity's greatest secrets. She turned back to the display, watching as the power grid continued its endless dance across the stars. Now, who's ready to learn about the engineering applications of DD-40? As the chamber erupted in questions and laughter, Sarah pulled out her notebook and began a new page of diagrams. The galaxy had learned to embrace imperfection, to find strength in adaptation rather than rigid order. And humanity, represented by a maintenance worker with a tool belt and a coffee addiction, had left an indelible mark on the cosmos. Sometimes the greatest revolutions don't come from grand theories or perfect solutions. Sometimes they come from someone who knows how to keep things running, one patch job at a time. The universe would never be the same, and that was perfectly imperfect.